going to try to give you a complete history of Sonoma County and how to fix everything that's wrong in 18 minutes. Let me begin. I'm Greg Sarris. I'm chairman of the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria. I was born and raised here. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about storytelling and changing the story that presently seems to be ruling this land. You know, stories are so important. Stories can kill 6 million Jews, or stories can change the world. And we live by stories. Many of the stories we live by are unconscious, but they have a lot to do with how we know who we are and where we are. Let me talk a little bit about first the indigenous people here, the Pomo people and the Coast Miwok people. You are living in an area right here in Sonoma County where there were more indigenous people than anywhere else in the New World outside of the present site of Mexico City, which was, of course, the Aztec capital. There are more people here speaking more diverse languages, many of those languages as different as English is from Chinese, than there was anywhere else in the New World. People were here for 10,000 years. Many of the cultures were here. It was a rich and diverse landscape. Anthropologists ask, how did so many people live so close together, speaking so many different languages with virtually no physical warfare? And, of course, had a sustainable relationship with the environment. How is that possible? Well, let me jump back a little. We had basically a philosophy that was predicated on the notion that everything in nature had power. That isn't just power to be good or all of that. I, as a person, might be a good person, and I have songs and power that could protect me. If you were to hurt me, hurt the animals that I was engaged with, those songs would come back on you and poison you. You might drop dead of a heart attack tomorrow, or your mother might, or your child might, or something like that. But everything in nature had that power that you didn't necessarily know about. What that meant was you were constantly decentered as a knower. You didn't assume to have control over anything. You were forced to be interdependent with everything. It predicated a profound kind of respect for all of life. And it wasn't tree-hugging respect, because we would ask, how do you know the tree wanted you to hug it? That tree had as much power. So what happened then is you had a culture where there was profound respect based on the power of all of life. That created a we mentality. We had to work. It was a mentality where we were here together and had to work together. The we mentality then created a responsibility, a sense of responsibility, because if you weren't responsible, if you got selfish or greedy, you would interrupt the we, and then you would interrupt the disrespect, and you would bring dis-ease and disharmony. Now, many indigenous peoples had this. We had it in a kind of an extreme. You know, the Europeans, everybody tends to see the world in terms of how they understand it. They always thought the Plains Indians were the most sophisticated, right? Because they had what Europeans understood best, which was organized warfare. Right? We were much more subtle. You dropped dead the next day. Also, we had a culture where the average workday was 45 minutes. Now, when you were, of course, picking acorns in the fall or when the salmon were running, there was much longer time. But generally, I asked Mabel McKay, the old medicine woman, I said, what did people do all the time? And she said, they wove baskets and they thought about God. Wow, that sounds pretty good. Art and philosophy. You know, that sounds pretty good to me. Well, basically, how we learned and how we remembered is we were so closely tied to the landscape. There was no such thing as wilderness. Wilderness comes when you're disconnected from the land and it's wild. The land was a garden. It was our home. We knew where all the quail in each area laid eggs. We cultivated everything. It was a landscape. The people said the Indians weren't using their land. We said they stole our garden. So what happened was each feature of the landscape told a story. Some good stories, bad stories, but always reminders of who we were, who our histories were. In essence, the landscape became our text, reminding us of where we were and reminding us of how to maintain our home and be home. What happened? A new story came with a new people. And that story, let's just go back 3,000 years. It was in motion before. But there was a story about a people that got escaped slavery, who had been taken from their homeland, escaped slavery, and they went into the desert, and they were promised by their God. The God told them that they were a chosen people and that they were entitled to a home. That became a toxic story. Now there's a reason, but it was toxic because all of a sudden they had the notion that they were chosen and they deserved and were better than and could go and begin to what? Dominate wherever they went. They were picked by God. That kept spreading to Christianity, to Mohammedanism, and everywhere those groups went, that pattern kept replicating itself until it came here in California. And the Indians here, the Pomo Indians, started a reaction to the colonization called the Bole Maru, or Dream Dance movement, that happened up in Lake County. And in that movement became a notion that the white man was associated with the devil, and there would be a better world when they all went away, and we would all wait for that world. In other words, what happened? We got lost respect for all things. Instead of a we mentality, it became an us-them mentality. And finally, we were no longer responsible for the place because we didn't even recognize it. We all become homeless, strangers in our homeland. And what predicates so much of our behavior and how we live is a profound sense of homelessness. We're not home. How can you do all these things that people are talking about today if you're not home? If it doesn't hit you at a deep level, if you don't feel responsible and connected to that place and that thing. So I think one of the important things, and again, when you have an us-them kind of mentality, lots of things, folks, go along with that. Fear, insecurity, fear of difference, all those kinds of things. Instead of celebrating heterogeneity, you stress homogeneity, right? Because you get frightened of anything that's different. You're no longer home. So the other thing that's very interesting is we're constantly waiting for something or going somewhere. Even as environmentalists, it'll be better when this happens, or it'll be better when that happens, right? Listen, the sun shines, the mountains rise, the water waits and is there. It's right here now. Or we just want to see nature over here and a city over here. I love it when people say to me, oh, you're an Indian, you must be into nature. Well, if you're breathing, you're into nature. Right? The middle of New York City's into nature. Or they love, the notion of solitude in nature, which is wonderful and blissful, I understand that. But when I go to a redwood grove here, it's got more voices and stories going on than a corner of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. But again, American Indians coming from the land rather than to it have that deep history. What we need to do is, once again, in Sonoma County here, is create that deep history. And it involves all our stories. It doesn't mean going back to the Indian world. It means acknowledging, waking up to the fullness of the place we are. Learning from the lessons. Learning from the Adobe mission over there. What happened? My great-great-grandmother was taken in there by the Mexican general, General Vallejo. What happens? There's all kinds of stories. What about the laguna? The body of water that needs to be taken care of. What was that before? What has happened in time? What are things we can do? One, quit worrying. Be here now. Mabel McKay, once she told me about how the world of Indian prophet and basket weaver, she talked about the world coming to an end or going to a change. And I was a young man and I was very concerned. I said, Mabel, what do you do? What do you do? And she laughed. She took a drag off her cigarette and she said, live the best way you know how. What else? Be here now. The other thing, one of the things I have my students do in my memoir writing and place classes, keep a journal. Pick a place that's sacred to you, where you live. Start looking up its history, anecdotes about the place. What kind of animals were there? What kind of animals are there now? So again, you have a deeper sense and can begin to start a sense of responsibility for the place. Because once again, I believe that until the land, again, our home, becomes our Bible or our text, as it was for the natives, And until we recreate, and it must be recreate because we can't go back. We're all here now. But until we recreate an ethic and aesthetic of place that generates profound respect for all life and all cultures and an interdependency, until it erases the us-them mentality and ultimately creates a profound sense of responsibility to maintain those ethics, we're never going to make it, no matter how many programs we want to institute. Because if we're still operating on the principle of an old story, we're going to be in trouble. Let me leave you with a couple things to think about. The young woman who sees that, say she has a father that is abusive to the mother, and she says intellectually, I'm never going to marry a man like that. That's terrible. I know that's wrong. How often does that same girl go to a party for the first time, walk in there and 100 guys, and the first one she picks out is the one that's just like her father? Why? Because stories are the things that we begin with are what we are emotionally. And emotionally is what we know even better and what rules us often more than what rules us consciously. We have to go deeper on this. There's lots of problems. I asked Mabel McKay once, again, when I was young. She said, with whatever, I said, there's so many things that are wrong and all of this. And I was an angry young man, and she said, you know, she was an Indian doctor, and when she was young, she was dreaming about all the diseases and things she had to treat. And she said, with all the things that have happened to you, or all of us, we still have two choices, folks. We can say that we can become angry, we can be fearful and organize, and I love some of these groups that want to do good, and all they do is try to compete to get money against other groups that are doing good. You notice that? Same with a lot of the environmental groups. I love them, but I mean, they all come to you to get more money for this. We need to work together. We need an umbrella kind of thing. Come together, folks. But she said, rather than let your heart fill with poison, rather than let your heart fill with anger and poison yourself and poison others, try to use all the things that have happened, to hear, even the bad things, as a chance to understand and to doctor and to heal. She said, you already got hate, you got problems. That's easy. She said, try the other. And finally, Gregory Bateson. Some of you may have read Gregory Bateson way back. He said, if we're all lemmings going over a cliff, we still have two choices. One is we can walk with the rest and drop off, or two, we can scream as we go and say, there's another way. So I like to say, my friends are screamers. Let's start screaming stories. Let's start finding a way so that we can all be home once again and quit wandering and really create a place. We can do it in Sonoma County. We've got the sun, we've got the land, and we've got the wonderful people and the stories. Thank you.